Abigail Hargrove was 41 years old and had nothing left but $23 and the clothes on her back when the railroad foreman told her the empty car on the siding could be hers for $15 if she hauled it off before the end of the week.
I know my work, Abigail.
Her husband's
Just
brother
finishing
had
this
cast her
wheel.
out after Thomas died in the collapse at the Silver Ridge mine, claiming the company house and the small plot they had worked belonged to blood kin, not a childless widow whose hands were too soft for real labor. She counted the coins in her palm under the harsh Colorado sun of 1892, knowing the purchase was foolish, a woman alone buying a forgotten railroad car rusting beside the tracks outside the town of Willow Bend. Yet something in the way the evening light slanted through its cracked windows called to her, and when she stepped inside the hollow shell, the air carried the faint scent of old varnish and distant journeys. She did not know then that beneath the last worn seat rested a single folded letter, its ink faded but its words still alive, words that would quietly mend what time and pride had torn apart between two families long divided. Settle in and let us tell you the story of Abigail Hargrove. If you are watching from a place that feels forgotten, tell us in the comments what small thing you have held on to when everything else slipped away. Abigail had grown up in a narrow valley in western Pennsylvania where the hills folded around small farms like protective hands. Her father, a wheelwright and occasional mail rider, taught her early that every object carried a story if one only looked close enough. He would let her sit beside him in the workshop, the smell of linseed oil and hot iron thick in the air, showing her how a single loose spoke could ruin a wagon or how a careful patch could make it stronger than before. Her mother, gentle and steadfast, ran a small schoolhouse for the valley children and kept a wooden box of letters from distant relatives, reading them aloud on winter evenings so that Abigail learned the quiet power of written words to bridge miles and years. Those evenings shaped her, the way her mother's voice softened over descriptions of new babies or hard harvests, the way her father mended harnesses with deliberate stitches, insisting that nothing was ever truly lost if one had patience and honest hands. By 16 Abigail could repair a harness herself, draft a clear letter, and comfort a neighbor with a cup of strong tea and a listening ear. When Thomas Hargrove, a quiet miner with dreams of Western opportunity, came courting, she saw in him the same steady patience her father had shown. They married and traveled by train across the Great Plains in 1878, the cars rattling like promises, arriving in Willow Bend when the silver boom still painted the future bright. Thomas worked the mines while Abigail took in sewing, taught a few children in their small company house, and kept a garden whose tomatoes and beans fed half the lane each summer. She believed in the dignity of small work, in the way community grew from shared tools and shared stories, never imagining how quickly the earth could swallow such certainties. The fall came slowly at first, then all at once. The Silver Ridge mine had always been temperamental, its tunnels following narrow veins that sometimes pinched shut without warning. Thomas spoke of the rock groaning at night, but the company pushed deeper. One October morning the groan became a roar. Abigail was hanging wash when the ground trembled and the whistle screamed long and broken. She ran with the other women, skirts whipping in the cold wind, only to learn that Thomas and 7 others had been trapped behind a collapse. 3 days of frantic digging brought out the bodies. The company offered brief condolences and small pensions to widows with children, but Abigail had none. Thomas's brother, Harlan, arrived from the next camp claiming rights to the house and the tools, saying blood came first and a woman alone could not hold property in a mining town. The neighbors looked away, their own losses fresh, their own fears louder than justice. By winter Abigail had sold what little furniture remained to pay for coal and bread. She moved from one spare room to another, taking in mending until her eyes ached and her fingers bled, but Harlan's influence in the company store made work scarce. One gray afternoon he stood on the porch of what had been her home and told her plainly that the new manager wanted the property cleared for a supervisor. She left with a carpet bag, her mother's old sewing box, and the $23 saved from her last jobs. The town of Willow Bend, once a place of shared suppers and barn dances, now felt like a corridor of closed doors. She slept in the livery loft for 2 nights, listening to horses shift and stamp, wondering if the resilience her parents had taught her was only a story for better times. On the 3rd morning she walked the tracks to the abandoned siding where old cars waited like forgotten promises. The foreman, a tired man with dust in the lines of his face, shrugged when she asked about the lone car. "Ain't worth hauling off. Wheels still turn but the company's done with it. $15 and it's yours, ma'am. Take it or leave it." Abigail counted the coins carefully, her heart pounding with the recklessness of the act. The car was a simple wooden coach, paint peeling in long curls, windows streaked with years of weather. Inside, dust lay thick on the benches and faint traces of old passengers lingered in the musty air, cigar smoke, wool coats, the ghost of rain on leather. She dragged her carpetbag aboard and sat on the nearest seat, feeling the weight of her foolishness settle around her shoulders. Yet as the afternoon light slanted through the grimy glass, something steadied her. This was shelter. For walls, a roof, and solitude. She spent the rest of the day sweeping with a borrowed broom, wiping surfaces with rags dipped in water from the pump, and nailing a piece of canvas over the worst draft. The work tired her hands in a familiar way, echoing her father's workshop. When dusk gathered, she lit a small lantern and began a more careful inspection, running her fingers along the seams of the benches where passengers might have hidden small treasures or lost items over the years. Beneath the last seat, where the wood met the floor in a shadowed joint, her fingertips brushed something dry and folded. She worked it free carefully, a single envelope yellowed with age, sealed but never posted, the ink on its face blurred but legible enough to read a name, for Elias Whitcomb, care of the Willow Bend station. The discovery sent a small shiver through her. She sat on the floorboards and opened the envelope with the care of someone who had been taught to respect written words. Inside was a letter dated 1871, written in a woman's elegant hand. It told of a desperate journey west, of a young mother named Clara Whitcomb traveling with her infant son to join her husband who had staked a claim near Willow Bend. Fever had taken the child on the train, and in her grief Clara had written this letter explaining the loss to Elias, her husband's brother back east, begging him not to blame the family line and asking that their shared inheritance, a small orchard and savings in Pennsylvania, be used to help any surviving Whitcombs find each other again. The letter spoke of a silver locket with 2 miniature portraits that Clara had placed with the child's body, and of a promise made between brothers before the war tore loyalties apart. Abigail read it twice, the lantern light flickering across the careful script, feeling the weight of years pressing down. The car had been part of that very train run, perhaps even the same car. She tucked the letter into her sewing box and lay awake that night listening to the wind move through the empty town, wondering what threads still waited to be mended. Over the next weeks the mystery deepened as Abigail cleaned and repaired the car with the skills her father had given her. She replaced broken panes with salvaged glass, patched the roof with tar paper begged from the livery, and turned the space into a modest home on wheels. Each evening she studied the letter, walking the town to ask gentle questions of older residents. She learned that Elias Whitcomb had indeed come west years ago but left after a bitter quarrel with his brother's widow, believing the family line had failed him. The widow Clara had died soon after, her grief never easing. Their descendants still lived scattered, some in Willow Bend running the general store, others back east tending the old orchard. A quiet feud had lingered, small accusations of theft and abandonment poisoning family gatherings for decades. Abigail's hands, busy with hammer and needle, moved with new purpose. She found old train ledgers in the station office, confirming the car's history on that fateful run. The letter was not just sorrow, it was a bridge. One faded line mentioned a hidden deed folded inside the locket, proof of shared land that could have eased both families' hardships. Abigail felt the story settle into her bones like the steady rhythm of train wheels on good track. This was not her treasure to keep but a key meant to turn in a rusted lock. Yet not everyone welcomed the turning. Harlan Hargrove heard of the widow living in the old railroad car and saw opportunity. He claimed the siding land still belonged to the company and spread quiet words that Abigail was stirring old ghosts to claim rewards that were not hers. Some in town, wary after years of boom and bust, sided with him, fearing any reopening of old wounds might disturb the fragile peace. The storekeeper, a Whitcomb descendant named Josiah, refused her polite questions at first, his face tight with inherited bitterness. One afternoon a group of men approached the car, suggesting she move on before winter. Abigail stood in the doorway, voice steady though her knees trembled, reminding them that the car was paid for and that some stories deserved air. The conflict rose like a sudden storm. Harlan petitioned the town council to have the car declared abandoned property, citing safety concerns. Abigail spent nights awake, mending clothes for neighbors in exchange for small kindnesses, gathering signatures from those who remembered kinder times. The stakes were no longer just shelter, they were the chance to restore dignity to a divided history and prove that one woman's desperate purchase could matter beyond herself. In the end Abigail chose restoration over any personal claim. She wrote careful letters of her own, copying the original with her mother's clear hand, and arranged a quiet meeting at the car one Sunday afternoon. Josiah Whitcomb came, reluctant, and 2 cousins arrived from the east by the very train that still passed through Willow Bend. Abigail served strong coffee and simple cornbread baked in a makeshift stove, the car smelling of fresh varnish and hope. She read the letter aloud, her voice catching only once, then showed the place beneath the seat where it had waited like a patient seed. The families listened, the old anger cracking as shared grief rose instead. Josiah's shoulders loosened, the eastern cousins wept softly. They discovered, through the letter's mention of the locket and deed, that the disputed orchard land could be jointly worked, its proceeds helping repair the town's aging schoolhouse and fund a small memorial for lost miners. Harlan stood at the edge of the gathering, watching. When the council met, the evidence of good faith swayed them. He received no reward for his bitterness, only the quiet knowledge that his own family's name now carried the shadow of greed while Abigail's quiet work brought light. The car remained hers, now a gathering place for stories and mending. In time the town remembered the widow who had bought an empty railroad car for $15 and found within it the means to draw divided families together again. Abigail Hargrove, 41 years old and once cast out with nothing but $23, had used the discovery not to enrich herself but to restore what pride and silence had broken. The orchard thrived under shared care, the schoolhouse rang with children's voices once more, and the railroad car stood painted fresh beside the tracks, a humble witness to resilience. We return, as all good stories do, to the beginning, a woman alone beneath a slanting light, choosing to believe in overlooked value. Abigail Hargrove showed us that quiet hands and patient eyes can still mend what the world has torn. Thank you for spending this time with us, listening to a tale of hidden worth and steady hearts. If this story touched something in you, share it with someone who needs reminding that forgotten places can hold unexpected gifts. Tell us in the comments, what is a time you found value in something others wrote off? Until next time, stay close.